The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. We are nearing the end of this very interesting book, Science at the Doorstep to God by Father Robert Spitzer. We are in the last chapter, which is chapter 6, entitled, Are We Free Amidst Our Experience of God? And so there's several sections. We discussed the numinous experience already. Now we're going to get to the divine origin of conscience and the 5 transcendental desires. I thought, wait a second, we're already past
We
there.
did that already.
We did that, I'm sorry.
I think we're on page 220 in this.
We are on page 220. Do we really have free will, which is section 5, and then section 6 is a conclusion of this chapter, after which there's a conclusion of the whole book, after which there's an appendix. So we have a few things to discuss.
Also, did we cover were you satisfied, Joseph, with whatever discussion of quantum physics, mechanics was involved in Father Spitzer's discussion?
I think that we queried or quibbled with some of his interpretation. I think Father was very good at interpreting our queries and quibbles. I think we probably basically covered.
And we'll get back to it briefly because my concern was that just as materialists reduced the mind to matter,
That's right.
in a certain sense, it seemed like Father Spitzer was elevating matter to mind.
That's right.
And it's a kind of a parallel or twin difficulty, but that'll come up again, at least briefly.
And that is where we left off, that discussion of that. So, okay.
Yeah. So do we really have free will? The answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what I love here, just the opening sentence from that section, I think it just shows that, Chesterton was a great one for common sense. But if you're a materialist, you have to abandon what everybody else obviously experiences as common sense. Because, if physicalism were correct, then freedom would be illusory because human beings would not be able to transcend biophysical and environmental influences from the laws of classical physics. In other words, that if you're going to insist on being a materialist, you have to insist that freedom's an illusion, which means that all of a sudden you're really living a lie, because not just common sense but common practice it involves the use of something which everybody sees as the freedom of the will, and to deny that really means you're living in an illusion.
I think most of us also understand on a common practice level that our wills are damaged. In other words, we, as St. Paul says, we don't always do the good we would like, and we do sometimes do the evil we don't want to do. And so we do feel this experience of my will. Let's just say my will isn't as strong as I would like it to be. But that is not the same thing as saying I have no will at all.
Right. And also, our will subject to things like, not subject to, but is influenced by things such as appetite, right? We're hungry, we want to eat, but so that's fair enough. But we do go on a diet, we do fast. In other words, we can choose to either go with the appetite or to restrain ourselves from going with the appetite. So even though certain things such as appetite and instinct might lead our will in a certain direction, we can resist that.
We can. And the more we practice resisting it, the stronger our wills grow. And that's one reason why the church gives us those disciplines to help us regain more freedom that we lost through sin,
Yeah. And I do want to talk about the next sentence, Father, because it does overlap with our discussion of quantum mechanics. He talks about here, it might be objected that quantum mechanics reveals nature to be indeterminate at its most fundamental level, which guarantees freedom. And I would just say there, of course, he's not necessarily agreeing with this. He's just giving.
Where are you speaking?
This is the following sentence from what I just read. So right at the top of page 221, the second sentence of the section.
Okay.
it might be objected that quantum mechanics reveals nature to be indeterminate at its most fundamental level, which guarantees freedom. Now, he's not saying he agrees with this, he's just giving an objection. But of course, something being indeterminate is randomness or chaos. It's not freedom. The fact that something can't be determined doesn't make it free. It just makes it random or chaotic. So I don't see why that it's even a logical point.
Also, remember that quantum mechanics has to do with subatomic particles and their truly random transformations and so on, radiation. But the statistical results of testing these particles is as ironclad and deterministic as any classical physics ever has been. So you can, for example, determine the half-life of uranium-238 is so many years. You can't tell which atom is going to radiate or decay, but you know for certainty that it's going to be exactly this percentage over time. So it may look like it's indeterminate because at that very low level, but when it comes to the level of ourselves, our minds, our universe, it's not indeterminate at all.
So is it a bit like throwing a dice that, you don't know whether it's going to be 1 to 6, but you do know if you throw the dice 1,000 times, it's going to be pretty evenly distributed between each of the numbers.
Yeah.
Unless the dice are loaded.
Well, yeah, that's cheating. Yeah.
Well, and a matter of fact, the dice are loaded because it turns out that if you roll the dice in quantum physics, random would be 50-50. It comes out 52-48 every time.
Really?
Yeah, which means that there's some cause beyond the randomness which leads the result to be an exactly predictable result. It's fascinating. Well, I don't think you can explain quantum physics without God. I don't.
Yeah. So it is a loaded dice, but we know exactly how it's loaded. 52-48.
Yes.
Wow.
And there was something else. Okay. I want to go to the next page here, unnumbered 223, because you talk about the powers of the soul. There's a diagram which I'll show, for the people who can see this. And I'll describe it for those who can't. He has two kind of rectangles with nice rounded corners. One called the soul, and it has inside it numinous experience and intentional love and self-consciousness. And the other one is called the physical body. And he's got cognitional sensation, the brain, and so on. This is a perfect time to point out the danger we're always in. We look at a diagram with the soul in one box and the body in the other, as if the soul and body were comparable, equivalent boxes. But the whole problem is the soul is not in the same category, in the same metaphysical category as the body is, so that every time you try and compare them, they seem like two of the same kind of thing, but they're not. And that throws off our thinking. We have to always be correcting our thinking. We are in bodies. We know through sounds and signs on a page. We have imagination. But the imagination cannot fully capture what the concept is. It's only a sign of the concept. And that's why, likewise, bringing back the quantum thing, to try and equate thought, which is spiritual, with quantum fluctuations in the quantum field, which is physical, is a category mistake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing, doesn't it also, lead to that sort of dualism, as if we're talking about...
Oh, exactly. This is the basis of dualism. Yeah.
Right.
Either dualism or reductionism. Either you see two separate things which you can kind of contain in your own mental view, or you reduce one to the other.
Yeah.
But we have to say, no, it's neither of those.
It's neither of those.
It is one reality of a different order than another reality, and the two together lead to what we call the human body, human person. But you have to guard it always against dualism or reductionism. And what's the result? I'm sorry, but it's a mystery. So we do not have the capability of truly understanding what this is and how it can be. I was going to say something about Chesterton, the great common sense philosopher, who says, if you are a materialist and therefore a determinist, the consequence of that is to say, please pass the salt or thank you for that makes no sense. How can you thank someone for something that was going to happen anyway? How can you ask them for something was going to happen anyway? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, and taken to another logical place, I heard an interview with people who are in fact determinists. At least they're honest. They're materialists, determinists, and they know there's no such thing as free will. Okay, so taken to a logical conclusion, just like you can't say please and thank you for something that's going to happen anyway, you can't punish someone for committing a crime that's going to happen anyway. And so their whole approach to crime is to set up really super fast algorithm AI kinds of tools to figure out who's going to commit a crime and incarcerate him before he does it.
But yeah, the other thing,
think about that for a few seconds.
Yeah, is the materialistic determinism materialistically determined? In which case, is it right or wrong? It can't be right or wrong. It can't be correct or incorrect. I mean, because my Christianity is also, materialistically predetermined. Our atheism and Christianity are all merely chemical reactions. And why are they so anxious about defending something which is just something which is a chemical reaction in their brain?
Right. Or as Lewis says in one of my favorite books by him, Miracles, why are those people who are materialists so bent on exhortation, telling us what we should do and not do? What's the point of exhortation?
And what's the point? Exactly.
All right, powers of the soul. Anything on that? The fundamental desires he talks about.
Well, I like what he says about self-reflective intentional love, which is number 4. So maybe I can just read the highlighted parts of that because I just thought it was good. So he talks about self-reflective intentional love. He says, in brief, love begins with empathy and
page.
Page 225, and then it's number 4 there. Self-reflective intentional love. And he says, in brief, love begins with empathy, an inbuilt sense of the goodness of another that elicits affection and sympathy. And then this moderates the fundamental drive of self-consciousness toward egocentricity, making us capable of sharing with others, sacrificing for others, and caring for those who cannot contribute to us. So again, I think that's very good, and it begs or opens out discussion into the freedom of the will, the importance of the other, and our response and reaction to the other. I think, and I just love that succinct definition of what self-reflective intentional love is.
I just read a very brief conversion story of a man who's now a Franciscan friar, and he was working with the poor because he thought he should, but he actually detested them. This was prior to his conversion. He must have gotten, there's all of this pressure to do philanthropy now in corporate. He was a very successful businessman, and I guess out of pressure, he was starting to do philanthropy, but he actually hated the poor, detested them, held them in contempt. And his conversion experience consisted in this empathy being awakened in him. Like for the first time, he saw the conscious recognition of the goodness, transcendence, and lovability of, this is on page 225 here in the middle. That was his conversion, was this just awakened in him all of a sudden, something he was just blind to before. He suddenly had a numinous experience of caring for this poor man And suddenly this recognition of that man's goodness, transcendence, and lovability, something he was blind to before. And that's what led him to God. In other words, it was through that then he became a believer. And I guess he'd been baptized a Catholic as a child, but was not practicing. He came back to the faith and now entered the Franciscan order. I mean, total transformation of his life.
Yeah, and that brings me to something which I think the Father and I sort of crossed swords with in some sense a week or two back about whether beauty is in some sense the life of the divine in something, and I'm not, I can't remember how we crossed swords, but the bottom of page 226, because this is the whole point. I think what that philanthropist who learned to love people and poor people was doing was actually seeing for the first time what Gerard Manley Hopkins in a moment of in stress, the inscape of the poor person, and that poor person is in some sense made in the image of God. He's in some sense seeing the life of Christ in that person. So at the bottom of page 226, we might paraphrase Plato's wisdom by saying that beauty is the intrinsically desirable, lovable, enchanting, and awe-inspiring divine attribute inhering in objects, ideas, and people. So there is something which is a divine attribute in beauty, and that's what I was trying to say. I don't know how badly I said it last time. I don't know how well Father Spitzer's saying it here, but that's really what I was trying to get at.
But I think it takes another level of conversion, if you will. Like, I think the experience of beauty can be a conversion experience or numinous experience. But it's a whole nother level now to see something that, at least visually, is absolutely unappealing. This poor guy is ugly. He smells. His behavior is disgusting. And here, like Mother Teresa, is someone seeing the distressing disguise, Christ in his distressing disguise of the poor,
right,
the beauty of Christ.
Which is why
right?
Beauty is not skin deep.
Exactly.
It's something much deeper than the merely the surface level.
And so that is something of a grace then, because it's not merely the sensory experience that's going to lead to that, right? It's something else.
And that's the point of Father Spitzer, is that all these various paths lead to the conclusion there's something beyond the sensory that's real. And I think I might have mentioned it before, but I'll bring it up again if I have. We have at our retreat house now 4 cats, and they're terrific at keeping the mice out of the house. But twice in my later years, I tried to learn to play the banjo. And it was sometimes partially decent. Most of the times it was not. But I get out of those cats in the room, and I start playing the banjo, twang, twang, twang. It was just nothing. They didn't even notice it was going on. Maybe that's because they're avoiding my bad banjo playing. But I've also noticed if you turn on the radio or a CD to like a Mozart symphony, they don't even budge. If there's a sound of a mouse or something, boom, on that. But they seem to have no perception at all of beauty and harmony and glory in musical notes, It's
if
just
I could just say, Father, that I have some very fond memories of your banjo playing on the interim campus at Ave Maria University. I'm not an expert on what makes an impresario at banjo playing, but it seemed very competent to me, and it allowed us to sing along.
Well, yes, I was in a little cabana. There were 2 cabanas with an arch between them and kind of a low ceiling. And it was like, if you ever try to sing in the shower, you sound a lot better than you really are. When I played the banjo inside this kind of arch that reverberated, and so it actually sounded pretty good.
Oh, we had some fun sing-alongs with you too. So
we did.
You don't have to be, a virtuoso to bring joy with
that's true.
Sing-along kind of music,
But Thomas made me give it up. Because Thomas is a virtuoso. And I see him play, and his fingers going so fast. I can't. I'm giving this thing up.
Oh,
Let someone who's really competent do it.
No,
Thomas, I hope you're feeling guilty.
It's sad. Yes,
guilty.
we all We outvote you 3-1.
Well,
That's
we're gonna-
sad.
We'll have Thomas play something for you sometime, and then you can vote again. All right, more of the powers of the soul, powers of the body. I have something on 233.
Well, can we just, would you mind just very quickly, fathers, you're the philosopher amongst us, before we get that far, section C on page 228, he talks about the 5 transcendental desires, which are being, truth, goodness, love, and beauty.
Yes.
Could you perhaps just say a little bit about that? Because that's, I know we discussed it earlier, but that's something which I'm trying to grapple with, because it's broadening my understanding of who we are.
What do you want me to say?
Well, I mean, how are they distinguished? I mean, how is being something distinct from truth or goodness or love or beauty? And not just the thing, of course, it's the desire for the thing. That's I remember being home. I love that. In other words, that basically to desire to be is to be who we are, right? And ultimately that's going to be being united with the perfect human person, Jesus Christ, in the heaven, and being one in some sense, beatific vision. That's home. But just the desire for being, which is home, truth, goodness, love, and beauty. And yeah, I can't remember why he distinguishes between goodness and love. I always conflate them, and perhaps I'm wrong.
No, I think he goes beyond the traditional categories here. And the distinction between what it is and our desire for it. And so being is absolutely most fundamental. And the idea is that everything that we can experience, everything we know is. And that act of existence is something which is dynamic and it transcends any particular being, because everything which is. It's kind of common, obvious, right? Likewise, everything which is true in this sense. Our truth is the correspondence of our mind to so if I say this book is kind of a cream color, my idea corresponds with the reality outside my mind, and the truth is a correspondence. Well, everything which is created by God and corresponds to his idea. And therefore, truth transcends every individual being. It's a quality, a transcendental quality of all things which are, because God thought them to be in that way. Goodness is the object of desire. God had to will it to be. So just like, I may say, well, the book is good because I can read it and it does some good for me. It's desirable for that point of view. But the fact that it exists and that God created it means he willed it, which means it is the object of desire, the object of his will. So those transcendentals to me are pretty describable. Beauty, which doesn't correspond directly to the intellect or to the will directly, but in the physical sense, it's the radiance of form. There's something about everything which has its own form, which radiates something deeper in it. That's the kind of forgotten transcendental, which, by the way, when Balthasar begins his great theological work, his first set of volumes is Theological Aesthetics, and he says beauty is the word that always comes last. He wants to make it go first. And so, Thomas, how do we define beauty? I mean, what do you think we should say about it?
Balthasar described it as the splendor of form.
The splendor of form.
Yeah.
But so everything which is a certain thing, it has a certain essence that somehow radiates something deeper.
Yeah, no, that's great, Father. That's actually very helpful. And I'm just thinking, you talk about these transcendental desires, being, truth, goodness, love, and beauty. in some sense, they are all attributes of the divine.
That's
and
right.
therefore we desire them because we're made in God's image, and union with them is union with Him. So that's the desire is connected to the divine. Would that be fair?
That's right, because we desire what is good, but no limited good will satisfy our desire. You always could desire more than what you have until you get to the good which is infinite and therefore can satisfy any possible desire, and that's God. God is a good. Likewise, we never say, "Oh, I know enough now.
Right.
I don't want to learn anymore. I'm not curious." So there's always something more to know until you reach the total reality, which is God, who contains all that is in His mind and in Himself, and then our desire for truth is satisfied. Yeah, as far as beauty goes, that's the difficult one.
Well,
And
not
of course,
necessarily. I mean, we don't when we see a beautiful thing, so a beautiful woman or a beautiful painting or a beautiful piece of music, think, well, I'm done now. I've experienced beauty. When you experience the next beautiful woman, I mean, to look at, or the next painting, or the next beautiful piece of music, you're delighted. In other words, you're going to continue to desire different beautiful things until you can be fulfilled in beauty Himself.
right, you want to possess the truth, you want to possess the good.
And wouldn't you say too that I read a version of the Nicomachean Ethics. It was a long time ago, and that particular translator used the word "the beautiful" to describe a virtuous act. A virtuous act is a beautiful act, and he gave his reasons in his introduction why, in translating the Greek, he saw this word there. I mean, I'm no Greek scholar, what do I know? But reading it with this word beautiful, describing an act, and then how when we think of Jesus on the cross, that is beauty in action. That is goodness in action. That is truth in action. So the fact that the transcendentals in a way can't be separated from each other, in God, they're all one. So the beautiful act is a good act, is a right act, is a loving act, is a truthful act, is a, you can't kind of separate these things. They're all connected.
That ties back to what I was saying about that beauty in some sense being the life, because it's not just something sort of static in a thing which is seen or experienced. We have to have life in us. There has to be an act in us of with sufficient humility for that moment of again, to just use Jeremiah Hopkins' terminology, that moment of in-stress in us, that moment first we experience it because we're receptive, and then we respond. So that there's something dynamic in beauty, in the sense that it has to be just not something static in the thing which we are engaged with. It's something alive in our engagement with it.
And I want to connect that with what Vivian just said about the cross being a source of David's beauty. Why is it beautiful? It's the manifestation of love.
Mm-hmm.
So beauty kind of has to do with the manifestation of what something is.
Mm-hmm.
It's good, it's true, it is, but it manifests itself in a form, in something we can grasp. And we understand it more clearly as human beings in a physical thing, a beautiful object, but intellectually, something which is true and good, we perceive it, we grasp it, and that very manifestation by which we grasp it is the beauty of the thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for indulging me.
I'd like to, this point that Father made about the book corresponding to first of all, corresponds to God's idea, but it corresponds to something already in our minds. And he talks about this elsewhere, about how these maps, if you will, are already in our intellect so that we can apprehend these things.
Right.
And so on page 230, he brings up Carl Jung, which I'm really glad he does, because Carl Jung now is back in vogue through the works of Jordan Peterson.
Yes, exactly.
And this discussion of the archetypes, so I'd like to just, he's Father Spitzer is linking Jung's theories of archetype to this point Father's trying to make about the spiritual archetypal subconscious. And I find this so fascinating. I'd like to read it. According to Carl Jung, human beings, even infants, are embedded with archetypal symbols that are filled with content about the divine, good, evil, virtues, the sacred, sin, sacrifice, heroism, purification, and love. These symbols are connected to a subconscious myth of a cosmic struggle between good and evil and a hero's action on behalf of the sacred to overcome evil. Note that the term myth here does not mean something false, but rather a legend of cosmic and enduring significance that illustrates our ultimate purpose in life and the ultimate destiny of world history. And this is why someone like Tolkien is so popular. This is why they have tapped into this, this subconscious that is the place where we apprehend the truth of these myths, even though they're fictional stories or fairy tales, listening to fairy tales that we tell children or whatever. We immediately know that this is true. Why? Because there must be some, framework already in our souls that corresponds to God, who's made all things. And we can see that God reveals the truth of things, the beauty of things, the goodness of things, not just through abstract theology or dogma or even sacred scripture, but in stories that are thousands and thousands of years old.
Yeah, I think what's interesting here is how do we connect that with the 5 transcendental desires? Because what we're talking about here is story. And it seems to me that that's those 5 transcendental desires in motion, right?
Yeah.
How do these things play themselves out, in practice, in time? Well, they're playing themselves out in terms of story, in terms of journey, right? And that's where myth comes from. That's the only way we understand things. These things we can talk about in the abstract, or we can experience them, which means there's something happening to us and others in time, in motion.
And we have the capacity, one more thing, Father, we have the capacity not only to experience these things, and then we hear a story, and that helps us make sense out of what we've experienced. And we can also benefit from the experience of others and now have a vicarious experience through hearing a story or reading a story, which furthers my understanding of myself. How does reading about Homer's Odyssey have anything to do with me? Well, in fact, it does.
Yeah,
and
reading Tolkien's magic word, their applicability, right?
Yes, that's right.
The story is applicable.
That's right.
We need to bring this to a close, but I want to have the last word.
Yes, please do.
Kind of summing up what you've just said, the two of you. I mean, because from our experience, stories take place in time. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. So one might think that heaven or hell is the end of the story, but it's not. Our story and time are moving images of something which is eternal, an eternal journey, if you will, deeper and deeper and deeper into the heart of God, or an eternal journey in a deeper, deeper despair because I've turned away from God. So the end of our lives is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the real story. We'll continue next session. See you then. God bless you.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Formed Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.